The Congress of South African Trade Unions is urging the South African Revenue Services to target wealthy individuals and companies to recuperate the fiscal shortfall brought about by the rescinding of the VAT hike in the 2025 budget and fiscal framework. COSATU says SARS should receive those resources to boost tax compliance by at least 2% or 40 billion per annum. COSATU's parliamentary coordinator, Matthew Parks, joins us this morning. I want to say Happy Workers' Day, Matthew. And as I quipped to the speaker, we're both on duty today, as are many across the country. So we just salute the country's workforce here and, of course, globally as well. But you are worried about unpleasant trade-offs in this budget, and you're hoping that the minister redirects his attention, or at least SARS redirects its attentions as well, in being more aggressive around how it goes after the super wealthy in our country. Share your concerns and the context for us.
Good morning. Thanks for having us. And I think we must appreciate our media workers who keep the nation informed. So thanks to you, Iman, and your colleagues. So our concern is about the tax regime must always be progressive. It must always help shield and protect those who earn the least, and make sure those who earn the most pay their fair share. I think we do want to appreciate that the government, or the Minister of Finance, has heeded COSATU and other organizations' calls to reverse the VAT hike. We felt it was going to present an unfair burden upon millions of struggling workers who are battling to cope with the rising cost of living. So our proposal really is around, number one, let's give the South African Revenue Service, whose employees, whose workers have done a fantastic job at improving tax compliance over the years. In the past 2 years, they managed to improve tax compliance from 61 to 64%. So that's an additional 60 billion rand to the state. We think we should simply be giving the South African Revenue Service the resources it requires to improve tax compliance. Each 1% of tax compliance they can improve is an additional 20 billion rand. So we should have a discussion with SARS to say, what do you need to improve tax compliance by 2% a year for the next 3 years? That's an additional 40 billion rand a year. That's just existing taxes. Because it doesn't make sense to introduce taxes, especially those which hurt the poor, working and middle-class families. Yeah, we're not enforcing tax compliance. We think there is plenty of space. SARS has shown it has the capacity. So let's go after the high-wealth individuals and companies who often, using fancy lawyers and accountants, manage to find loopholes. There is a significant debtors book that SARS has, which they want to prioritize. Let's also look at luxury goods imports. Apologies. Let's also look at imports coming through our customs ports of entry, where the importers often under-invoice the value or find ways to circumvent loopholes, to find a gap, etc. And it's simply also to look at the illicit tobacco and alcohol trade, which often circumvent the tax regime. So I think first, before you start introducing new taxes, go and make sure we collect the existing tax that are owed. And we have in SARS a very powerful vehicle, which has shown us that the capacity to do so. That for us makes more sense than imposing more taxes upon those who already paid the taxes than those who are not surviving.
Yeah. I mean, as you say, Matthew, one of our problems has been both legal, and take a minute to cough, by the way. Have a sip of water. You're off air for a minute. Just take a sip of water and have your cough. But we have legal and illegal tax evasion or tax avoidance in South Africa. As you were saying, from the legal side, wealthy individuals have their trusts or they've got their offshore accounts, and they've got these also complex corporate structures to legitimately minimize their tax liabilities. But then you also have, on the illegal side, outright evasion, which is underreporting underreporting income, overstating some of the deductions, or not disclosing those offshore assets. From my understanding, we already have the high wealth individual unit inside SARS that is looking at individuals who might be guilty of this practice. Where else and how, given that you're making the call, do you think that they can be given more teeth to aggressively go after this cohort and accrue the kind of money that will make a significant dent in the country's balance sheet?
So I think simply it's just to give them the resources, give them the support they need to go after these people. They know who they are, but they need the physical manpower or person power. They need the physical resources. They need to invest in the capacity of SARS, the infrastructure, in particular its IT, its artificial intelligence capacity, to really to have a precision-focused point to it. It doesn't make sense to go after, some ordinary worker who owes a few hundred rand or a few thousand rand. But many of these people are extremely wealthy. They owe billions of rands to SARS. But it doesn't mean SARS needs to have the personnel capacity. It means they need to have the forensic specialists, the accountants and lawyers who really dig through these people's quite complicated asset base. And it's worthwhile because you're talking billions of rands, but it's also about reinforcing tax morality, because it doesn't make sense to squeeze a nurse or a teacher to pay their tax, yet you've got very powerful, wealthy individuals who are finding ways to circumvent it. And if you compare the stats from Stats SA, municipal rates databases, to SARS's, you'll find a huge discrepancy. You'll find more millionaires according to property ownership in the Santons or the Constantias of the country. Yet when you look at SARS, there's a huge gap. There's something wrong there. And so I think we need to simply tell SARS what you need. And I think from our understanding that SARS needs about 20 billion rand to go after this 800 billion rand of tax owed to the state. That makes sense for us. That's a huge return on investment. There's an additional 4 billion rand that has been given to SARS this year. That's a positive first step. We would actually want to see, let's increase it to 10 billion this year, 10 billion next year, but then give SARS an obligation publicly. They must improve tax compliance by at least 2% this year and another 2% for each of the following years.
Yeah.
That's an additional 40 billion rand. I think for us, that's the solution. And if you remember, under the Mandela and the Mbeki administrations, the engine of their successes was Pravin Gordhan's work at SARS, the team at SARS who really made it into the engine room of the administration. We think the commissioner of SARS, Edward Kieswetter, has done well. They've appointed an additional 500 staff. They've invested in IT capacity. They are making inroads, but it's not enough, and they need more support.
Well, what mechanisms should Parliament be using to ensure monthly SARS oversight becomes a reality and not just a wish?
I think for us, we have to treat this crisis as a national crisis, the same way we dealt with it during COVID. Parliament should be activated. The finance committees in Parliament should be having monthly meetings with SARS, where SARS is called to account. What are they doing around income tax evasion? What are they doing around customs fraud, around the illicit trade, around clamping down on the ports of entry, under-invoicing, and so forth? Elevated that. And then we really put a fire under SARS, make sure they do what the nation needs them to do. But this is not an ad hoc or a side issue. Efficient SARS can generate the revenue that the state requires to fund public services, to employ teachers and police officers, to invest in the infrastructure of the economy to stimulate growth. If they get it right and the rest of the state can be managed, the economy can take off, jobs can be created. But if they don't get it right, if they don't have the support, then we're going to continue to have this crisis of a budget this year, replaying next year. It's going to be there the year after. And we've been along this road for the past decade plus. We've been stumbling along 1% GDP growth rate. We've almost normalized a 40% plus unemployment rate. And those are ticking time bombs.
Yeah.
We're likely, with the global tariff instability right now in the world, to see our own GDP growth projections this year for just under 2% being slashed by half. That's something we can't afford. And what we can control is SARS. We can make sure the state has the money it needs to pay nurses, to build hospitals, to build roads. And I think for us, this is what we have to do.
What about cabinet travel and perks as we close, Matthew?
Sure. So I think part of the debate also that, well, we disagree with the VAT hike is that the VAT hike was going to add about 1.6% to the budget. Surely within a budget of 2.6 trillion rand, you can find 1.5% of wasteful expenditure. I think last week's Sunday's papers about the Gauteng provincial government spending 34 million rand a month renting offices, yet they have dozens of buildings standing empty in Joburg. It just points to the need to shake up wasteful expenditure in the state. And again, you'll find, come November in the medium-term budget statement, municipalities will be returning billions of rands of money unspent. So we need to have a frank review of expenditure, what is needed, what is not needed. How can we reduce wasteful expenditure? And that can also coincide with a revenue focus too. But I think for us, those are the priorities, and I think that's the message from society at large. We should not be increasing taxes upon the poor when there's a huge amount of wastage in the state, and when many of the wealthy individuals defy paying the taxes owed to the state.
All right, we'll leave it there with Matthew Parks, who's COSATU's parliamentary coordinator. Thanks for talking to us this